Casting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City, here is Steve Malzberg.
The tears of the UN relief agency's Chris Gunness and the serial escalating condemnations of United Nations leaders up to and including Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, who called the direct shelling of at least 6 schools where Palestinians were sheltering from the war with Israel a moral outrage and a criminal act. Those condemnations and expressions of outrage have done exactly nothing to protect civilians in Gaza. So far, the war in Gaza has left more than 1,800 Palestinians dead, the population equivalent to 100 9/11s, mostly civilians, and including women and hundreds of children.
100 9/11s is what she called what Israel did. She ought to be disciplined. She ought to be made to apologize for that, because she's talking about a terror group in Hamas. They're terrorists that Israel's fighting, yet she calls Israel the de facto terrorists here, quoting Palestinian death figures without saying how many were Palestinian terrorists that were killed. It's disgraceful, disgraceful. Joining us now is senior writer at the Washington Examiner, Philip Klein. And Philip, welcome. You're free to weigh in on that, but you wrote a great piece about how despite that kind of rhetoric from the media, despite the rhetoric from Obama and Kerry, it's not going to change or create more Jewish Republicans. Why not?
Well, let me say at the outset, as a Jewish conservative, I love nothing more away from their lockstep embrace of liberalism in the Democratic Party. But the reality is that if you look at actual Jewish voters, first of all, most of them don't vote primarily on Israel. There was a poll taken in 2012 that said only 4% of registered Jewish voters considered Israel the most important issue. And I'd wager that most of those people are probably voting Republican anyway. And I think that for most Jews, issues, economic issues and social issues are more important. And on those issues, they tend to be more aligned with the Democrats. On issues such as taxes, on health care, on abortion, on a whole host of issues, they tend to line up more with Democrats. And the other issue, too, is that to the extent that Democratic Jews or Democratic-leaning Jews may care about Israel, they define support for Israel a lot differently than you or I would. So, for instance, if you look at some polling data of Democratic Jews, there was a poll taken last year, and there are majorities of Jewish Democrats who still have faith in a two-state solution, who support an ongoing peace process, who are critical of the construction of settlements. And so, whereas you or I, when we hear rhetoric of Obama trying to pressure Israel into concessions during the peace process that we know realistically has no chance because there never has been a peace partner among Palestinians, even though we know that. For liberals, they don't necessarily believe that. They still believe this sort of peace rhetoric, and even though we know that Jews building homes outside of Jerusalem isn't the threat to the world peace the way that a nuclear Iran is, there are other Jews who see settlements as a problem. So I think that when they hear someone like Obama talk about settlements, talk about how he really cares and he really wants to create peace in the region, that they're able to think, okay, he's pro-Israel enough, and I agree with him on health care and on immigration and on 10 other issues that are more important to me. So that's why I don't think that in anything like, let's say, the Gaza conflict or Kerry's disgraceful handling of it, where basically he was prioritizing Hamas's needs, which is designated as a terrorist group by his own State Department, over our ally Israel. It was disgraceful. But realistically, when push comes to shove in an election, when people are arguing about Obamacare or taxes or other issues, and the Tea Party and so forth, that a lot of American Jews are going to side with Democrats,
Right.
and Democrats are going to say the boilerplate pro-Israel language that you hear. I've often attended the AIPAC conference, and you see this all the time.
Yeah.
There's this myth that somehow Hillary Clinton is pro-Israel, the woman who sat silently and kissed Yasser Arafat's wife as she talked about Jews poisoning Palestinian children. And this is someone that they'll convince themselves is pro-Israel.
Absolutely. Now, and Philip, interesting also in the piece, you talk about that if there is going to be a shift among American Jews to the Republican Party, it'll happen gradually.
Yes, and that's the issue, is that really if there are any shifts, it's going to have to do with demographics of Jews changing in America. And what that is that a lot of reform and more secular Jews tend to intermarry more. They tend to have fewer kids than more religious Jews who tend to have a lot of kids and obviously marry within the religion and preserve the faith. And so if you look at the voting patterns of Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Jews, they're basically overwhelmingly Republican. I was looking at some data that Pew put out, and basically ultra-Orthodox and white evangelicals.
Yep.
So basically there's very strong voting. So if you look decades from now, as Orthodox are a larger percentage of the American Jewish population, you may see Republicans do a lot better with the Jewish vote.
Right.
But it likely isn't going to be in response to something like how the Obama administration responds to
and
Gaza.
unfortunately, in your view and my view, it's going to take a long while to get that accomplished. Philip Klein, senior writer at the Washington Examiner. Also, check out his book, Conservative Survival in the Romney Era. And appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Yeah, very interesting. A conundrum for people like me, for Jewish Americans like me, who you could beat your head against the wall. And there's, unfortunately, a majority of Jews in this country that will support Obama, Hillary, anybody with a D next to their name, because, I don't know, they're pro-Israel, whatever. All right, we'll be back with more of the show after the break. But first, you want to vote? Should Barack Obama be impeached? Newsmax.com/Obama poll. Newsmax.com/Obama poll.